Howdy, this is Brownstone Cowboys Magazine, Conversations. We get two creatives with a common focus to sit down and share their truth. In this episode, we sat down with Brigette Lundy Paine and Paperboy Prince to talk about gender roles, capitalism, and the power of love.
Where are you? Where is everyone? For context, in the world.
I am in Fort Greene.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah.
So you're not too far.
Yeah, not too far at all. Where are you?
I'm in Bushwick, Bed-Stuy right now, right in the borderlands.
I can't believe I'm talking to you.
I'm excited to meet you as well. Well, we have the question here, gender. Being both parents of children that are non-binary and trans, it's been amazing to learn through our children's generation. Feels like we are moving towards a future where gender is fluid. Can you share your own experience with gender? Can you talk about where you see the perception of gender in the future? I would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah. I have been exploring my gender with the freedom of fluidity for the last year or two in a more vocal way and in a more intentional way, and like trying to unlearn what gender has meant to me and what it can mean, and both how I can free myself from it, but also acknowledging that it's something that exists so thoroughly in every aspect of life that it's not something that you can, it's not something that you can pretend doesn't exist. So I think that sometimes we get confused with the idea of gender isn't real or gender doesn't exist, instead of, no, gender is a series of socialized constructs that we encounter daily and that are sold to us in order to uphold capitalism, right? And so exploring gender fluidity is something that for me has freed me from certain expectations, both socially and in my work. So I'm an actor, which is an incredibly gendered field. We're portraying stories that are upholding the idea of gender. That's what a lot of the stories that are sold to us do, right? Like starting in Disney princess stories when we're little kids to like rom-coms when we're a little older, and then stories about what it means to uphold the family structure, the nuclear family structure, which is often a very violent structure. And so I was lucky enough to have people around me and on my team who supported me in being someone who is gender fluid. And as an actor, that means that now I'm challenging the people who want to work with me to explore what gender is in their work. And so sometimes that means that I can help change a character. So the character that I just spent 4 years playing was a teenage girl named Casey on Atypical. And that was a character that was written as like a straight, presumably girl who was, just the younger sister in this family structure. And I had the chance to really fuck her gender up. And, Moj the Dafferty, who's the costume designer, and I worked together to gender fuck the costumes. And, we wore very minimal makeup, which was something that's rare for TV and you have to push for, and the makeup designers were all really supportive of that. And so it's little ways. And in my personal life, I just don't think about gender very much. Either that or I think about it all the time. I can't tell. But yeah, it's always changing,
Interesting. To your stuff about television and makeup, and this isn't really about gender, but it is kind of. I used to live not too far from Portugal for a while. I lived in Spain for a few years. And what was so interesting to me was watching television there, watching like Spanish television. And it was so different from American television, so different from even like the like television we get here. It made me realize how unrealistically attractive everyone on American television is. It's like even as a kid, I would know this, but I would play into the story and believe it. Like watching Lizzie McGuire and she's being like, I'm just a normal girl that's having like trouble in life. And I'm like, you're beautiful. Like, you're like a beautiful, like a stereotypically beautiful person. You don't seem like the awkward teenager. Like, if you're the awkward teenager, then oh my God, what am I? You know, like, it's how I would feel watching it. And like, but watching Spanish television, the people's teeth weren't like perfect, like how everyone's is. And like the homeless people on American television, we having like perfect teeth. And like,
Yeah.
you know, there it's like, it was just so different.
I love all of that. I think that's all so important to point out and acknowledge with the media that we're consuming, because it's true that it is like a constant flow too, right? Like, we're never cut off from this media, and it affects every single thought we have. And I actually wanted to ask you, because I know so often you talk about like breaking the matrix. How is your how are you able to break out of these? Because you do, like, when you watch your work, both your political and your artistic work, like, you don't feel like you're living in the same media saturated culture that we're used to. And I think that's why it's so surprising and refreshing. And like, how do you go about that? What does that practice look like for you?
Growing up, I have had like great parents that I love a lot. And growing up, I wasn't allowed to watch any I wasn't allowed to watch a lot of television or movies. In fact, I wasn't able to go to the movies until I was like a teenager, basically. You know, for like religious reasons. And like, you know, my parents were super on that. And like, as a kid, I was kind of like, like I hated it. But like as an adult, I'm so happy about it. So I wasn't allowed to like listen to any popular music, only like gospel music, and even like specific version of that. I wasn't allowed to like read all types of books, like, you know, or watch any type of television. So they were very strict with that. And I'm so thankful. And it made me then, when I started looking at everything, when I finally was able, I was like looking at it through a lens of assuming that it's bad, or not that it's bad, but that it's not like all there for me in a good way. And yeah, like media literacy is super important to me. And you know, so my parents kind of like teaching me how important it is to protect your eyes, protect your ears, what you're watching, what you're seeing, you know, and like knowing that it's okay to not try to be like what's on TV or be what's in music, you know, like the popular music. I never felt, in fact, I never wanted to be an artist or a musician or any of these things, because I grew up thinking that like all of this stuff was so silly, and you know, people took themselves way too seriously. You know, I was in school and I wasn't really like, never came across as like the tough guy, and I never felt that pressure to be. I always felt comfortable being myself, you know, and not feel like, oh, I have to like be super tough and then or live up to this fake ideal that isn't really like serving me or making me happy or making me more human. It's still interesting to me about like taking the genders off of birth certificates, right? And all of these things. And, you know, all of this is very interesting because no one knows what to do. And I also think like I think of everything as like a team, and everyone has roles. And so gender roles have allowed us to accomplish certain things. And now, and everyone notices this. And then the fear is, without these roles, then how we accomplish these things, or who's going to fill these roles. I'm curious of your progression of when you felt comfortable expressing your own gender for yourself. And this is a twofold question. One, do you think that, because this is a worry that I have, that the non-binary, trans, all of this gender expression is just a new form of the gender binary, right? The gender trinary or whatever is a new just form of the gender binary, and it can become that, right? Even non-binary folks filling this new role. And do you think that, how do you feel about children expressing their gender, and that's on the whole spectrum, being like super masculine, super feminine, you know, or hyper femme, well, and anything that is in between that? Like, I'm curious of like your thoughts on that.
Mm. The labeling and the taking away of gender labeling, or like gender neutral bathrooms, or, you know, taking gender off birth certificates. These things both feel satisfying in ways because it feels like a relief to finally be acknowledged as, you know, gender being the construct that it is, but it so is the tip of the iceberg of how pervasive our understanding of gender is. So these systems, and like the idea of masculinity and femininity even being these two very polarized identities and sets of behavior, that is what continues to be violent, right? Like systematically violent, like the ways in which our government, our social institutions, the family structure is all defined by the idea of masculinity being something that is tough, dominant, and to be respected, and femininity being something that is pliable and submissive, and something that can be dominated, right? And so those are the things that we have to unlearn socially, and we have so much work to do on that, because that's something that we, from the dawn of time, and biologically, is something that is reinforced, right? Like when someone has a child, or when a female has a child, or when someone is responsible for children, they are automatically put in a position of submission by the family structures, by the biological family structures that we continue to uphold. I was in Paris and I saw Isabella Rossellini give this like insane lecture on Darwinism that was all in French, and so I only understood half of it. But she was basically asking the question of like, Darwin was obsessed with the idea that women, or that female animals, were the ones who were less flashy, and yet they were the ones who got to make the biological decisions. They were the ones who got to choose who the male in their mating couple would be. You know, she described how ducks can like block off certain passages in their vagina, even if they're like having sex with a duck that they don't like, so that they won't reproduce with this particular duck. But then they are, you know, they're sort of chained to the family structure, and they are sucked dry. Literally, spiders, female spiders, when they have children, the children consume the mother, literally, and she is eaten by them so that the little spiders can survive. And so these systems that we're dealing with are much deeper than, you know, changing the language around gender, which I think is what makes it really hard to talk about this very valid concern of, is non-binary just another, are we able to conceptualize it as not just a third gender? You know, women, men, and non-binary people is something I hear all the time, and it makes me so mad, because it's like, well, I get it, but also like, it's not, we're not a third gender, you know. And also transness can be hypermasc and hyperfemme. Some people really identify with the gender binary, and that's super valid too. But I think that what's important about the conversation is that every time that someone who doesn't identify with the gender binary, in whatever way that they explore that, whether they're a little kid who, you know, wants to wear clothes that aren't for their gender, or whether they're a public figure who is challenging the gender norms in their workplace, or on in a political way like you are, or, you know, different people who challenge it in fashion and in film, and in these ways that are very visible, or even in quiet ways. If you're, you know, a trans or non-binary person in the workforce, and you're speaking with HR, and you're making it a safer place for people of your gender identity or gender fluidity, it's important because we challenge the way we think about the deeper structures So we can really go through our whole life playing gender roles, which, like, you know, you mentioned that you were super fluid as a teenager, or at least you didn't feel the need to be hyper-masked. I, on the other hand, was a cheerleader in high school. I was like super feminine, doing like a complete performance of like American femininity. And I know how easy it is to live under the guise of, I'm just going to go through my whole life and never think about these feelings and sort of push it down. And I think culturally, if we can begin to push it down, then that's where, I don't know if it's like change or if it's just like a sort of deeper understanding of what humans are and the game that we're constantly playing, this like narrative that we're constantly pushing on each other, which just isn't true, you know, which is basically capitalism.
No, I feel like there's a jealousy that a lot of men have of women. And I feel like even this is a portion of what is at the root of, I don't even want to say misogyny anymore, but like just like the gender wars. And it's like, you have this and I don't, and like these type of like finger pointing things. And, you know, like, because a lot of men don't like being a man or what it means to be a man. Like, you know, we didn't all get together and get to decide on that. And I know a lot really don't like it. And before I knew anything about gender non-conforming or non-binary or all these different things, you know, before I knew anything about that, I felt a certain way that a woman could wear, what's it called? A woman could wear a dress, a pretty ballroom gown, and then later that same day, wear, you know, baggy pants and a big t-shirt and still keep her femininity, still keep her womanness, that not be in question at all. In fact, that's still being a part of femininity. And I mentioned the Drake line where he talked about sweatpants, hair tied, chilling with no makeup on, you know, like still being super attracted. It's still like pedestalizing this femininity, even as they're acting out things that aren't seen as stereotypically feminine. Whereas as a man, you wear a dress one time, you wear eyeshadow one time, you get your nails done one time, you lose your manhood. Like, you literally aren't seen as a man by men, by women, by everyone, right? Like, even by non-binary and gender non-conforming people, you're no longer seen as a man anymore. You don't, like, you know, masculinity, I always saw it as so small. There's such a small window that you get to operate within. And so I wonder if you feel or you see this same type of, I'm struggling for words here, this same type of constraints that existed in femininity, because you were talking about being a cheerleader and all of this stuff. And or do you see it as, because the point that I'm kind of getting at is, I feel like there's a lot of gender fluidity in femininity and womanhood. I feel like that does not exist at all in masculinity. And I even feel like because of masculinity, manhood purposefully doesn't have this gender fluidity.
Yeah.
It's a sacrifice for
Right.
womanhood. And as women make many sacrifices for men and manhood, I feel like men are supposed to be this strong thing to allow even women to have this fluidity possibility. And this is where some of the jealousy comes from that I was talking about before. But I'm just curious your thoughts on that, and if you feel that there's those same constraints within femininity that you felt at younger, or yeah.
I mean, absolutely, there's less fluidity in masculinity, But I think that, I mean, this is just evidence of the patriarchy being constraining to men as much as it is to female identifying people. Like, no one demands that masculinity be kept as this sacred thing other than masculinity, other than the patriarchy, right? Because it's constantly reinforced that in order to keep the power, this idea of masculinity must be upheld, even though, like, clearly it's a fallacy. It's not a real thing, masculinity. Like, you prove that in your daily life by dressing however you want and presenting however you want and saying fuck you to the rules, even though it's painful and even though there is rejection. But the fact is, women or people who identify as women or people who are born as female have more fluidity because they're taken there because of the lack of power, and because there's less, they're taken less seriously, and so there's less to uphold, which can be a privilege. You know, a lot more people identify as non-binary who were assigned female at birth than who were assigned male, because to identify as non-binary if you were assigned female means that you can wear whatever you want, which might be things you were wearing otherwise. You can sort of sneak into a non-binary identity, or you can even sneak into a transmasculine identity. Whereas for people who are assigned male, so many more people identify as trans women and less so as non-binary people, because, and a friend of mine yesterday was just talking about a third friend of ours who's a trans woman who describes coming out as trans as cracking open an egg, and that this is an experience for a lot of trans women or trans femme people, because it's something that you can either let destroy you, or you can crack out of and you can become. Masculinity is that egg, and it's something that is all consuming. Masculinity is the most delicate thing that we hold socially. It's completely vulnerable to all of the elements. That's why, I mean, so much of masculinity is protected by money, because money is really the only thing that can separate you from the daily vulnerabilities of this earth. I think that, like, for me, for my experience as like a cheerleader in high school, of course that was like, there were, if I would have identified as queer in high school, things would have been really different for me, but I won't ever know what that experience was like, because I didn't. I was identifying as straight in high school. I was in a weird abusive relationship and I was not happy. And so I didn't take those risks. And I think that, like, what is so special about, you know, Zoe and Heather Mary, who arranged this interview, and other parents of non-binary and trans kids, is that now there's an opportunity to, like, foster self-understanding and self-acceptance at a much earlier age, so that kids can come into high school, middle school, elementary school, and can identify the way that they want in the way that makes them feel comfortable. And kids around them will therefore be able to identify more comfortably the way that they want. And starting from, you know, a different level of earlier emotional development, will be able to unlearn how gender oppresses us. Because I know for me, and I think we're maybe the same age, like, gender was still really oppressive and unchanging when I was a little kid, you know, and that really still affects me to this day, and it sucks. I wish that I had been a kid when life was more fluid, but also I completely understand that, like, you and I are doing what we do so that kids can have a more fluid existence.
I get messages from kids that are like, you know, that they've, like, were trying to transition, and because they didn't have the money, they decided to not, and they're like in this weird in-between stage of, you know, because there's all these things that are happening, and they're like, we're in this weird in-between stage of, like, they don't know what they are, other people don't know what they are, so, and they don't even know what to say, they're just, like, being them, and they're trying to figure it out, and they're like, there's a lack of role models, and there's a lack of like a life lane of like, oh, what does a non-binary 50-year-old look like? What does a you know, a trans 100-year-old look like, right? Like, what does that look like? And I think that's important. In some of my work politically, some things that opened my eyes, I've got to talk to some groups, and, you know, because a lot of this stuff, the shame of like the queerness and it's like non-binary and all of this stuff is that it hyper focuses on youth and not seniors. And I think that is capitalism as well, and all of these things. And, you know, and it's something that I'm trying to transition into, and like want to use my energy to help remind folks to like, yo, let's like uplift our seniors. Like, let's support them like we support a newborn baby. And, you know, queer and LGBTQ seniors have a tough time, and especially the seniors that are like existing like now and before now, because they grew up at a time where, you know, they weren't allowed to be open with their relationships in their 20s and in their 30s and even in their 40s. So they had to hide all of that, or maybe deny love, not be able to have their partner. So then now they're later in life, they don't have their partners. Whereas somebody who, you know, is in a traditional hetero relationship is able to have a partner there at the end of life. And like all of these folks, you know, are dying alone, and they don't have friends. And then a lot of the places to make friends and make lovers and all of these things aren't set up for them. You know, like all the queer stuff is set up for younger folks, and all of the stuff for older folks is like more like maybe church oriented, or, you know, focused on this traditional vibes, right? And they're like alternative, they're queer. I wasn't even able to express my own masculinity however I wanted as a kid. For example, like I wanted cornrows, right? Like Allen Iverson had when I was a kid. I wanted to be like Allen Iverson and have my hair back. And my mom wouldn't let me do it because she was like, you don't understand. They're going to stereotype you as this type of Black man, and they're going to want to, you know, say you fit descriptions, and then people are going to try to put you in this box because of that. So I wasn't even able to be like, do the type of, or, you know, I wasn't gonna wear a certain type of clothes and things like that. So, and definitely not being able to like express any type of queerness. I remember wanting to like wear weird things to school, and my parents would just, they would be like, oh, they're gonna make fun of you and pick on you. So they wouldn't let me. And I think it's so interesting. I'm curious to see what it looks like for folks that are raising their children in this way. Like, one, how much they're allowing them to even express their own gender identity. Like I said, I wasn't able to, there was a limit on even the masculinity I could express. And then, yeah, like what that ends up being, you know?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm so curious to see. I just literally have no idea. And our relationship with our elders, I think, is such an important thing to bring up, and a relationship that I'm so glad to hear that. I love that you said take care of them like a newborn baby. I mean, like, we really, I think, in order to foster the future, have to pay attention to our past as queer people and how our elders are treated by us as a community. So I think like there's such a loneliness to being a queer elder now, especially if you don't live in a big city. My friend and I just did, in February, we did it was a 4-part workshop on gender expression, and we had a bunch of folks from Canada and the US come together and just discuss what it was like to be a gender nonconforming trans person in these different parts of the country. And some people were calling in from really rural areas in Canada, and just the loneliness of being completely isolated without community, especially, and this is something I've been thinking about so much lately is how many of our elders we lost to AIDS, and how different it would be as a queer community if the AIDS epidemic hadn't been handled the way it was, with such intense hate and discrimination, and so many people were left to die. Because now we're like starting over in so many ways. I mean, of course we know our history, and that's been something that's been very important for us to preserve as a queer community, but also like so many of the voices that would have been guiding us aren't here. And so I don't know I can only imagine that the future is going to be so fucking beautiful and so charged with the force of what this feels like, you know, what your work feels like, what the kids who I see on the internet feel like. Like, I'm always astonished when I talk to kids on the internet because of the work they're doing in their own schools and their own lives, and like we're unlearning the oppression of gender and the messaging that we've all been taught.
A major critique I have of like the LGBT community is how like being so desperate for validation and acceptance that like these like evil corporations, all they have to do is like put somebody with blue hair in the ad, and then it's like, oh my gosh, this is so good. And it's like, wait, no. Or like my first time at Pride, my first time at New York City Pride, like pretty out, and like being astonished, me saying like, what, this is the most corporate parade that I've ever been to, right? And being somebody's like, you know, being a part of a lot of like Black revolutionary movements and going to a lot of protests as a kid and seeing all of that, and then going to like Pride, and it's just like looking like I'm watching YouTube ads. It's like, it's literally Walmart, American Express, Target, like Walgreens, like the NYPD, like all of these things. And it's just like, oh, they got a rainbow in TD Bank. Ah! And it's like, it's cool, but it's like also like, I cringe and I get upset because it's like, wait, folks aren't using this opportunity to critique and hold these companies to a new higher standard. They're just happy to have a it's not even doing anything. They'll just put a rainbow on it. Yeah. And then it's just like, oh yeah, we're like, this is like, you know the meme where the guy's like, is this you know, it's like a rainbow on Walmart, and it's like, is this progressive, like positive? Like, it's like, no, this is just a rainbow. And that bothers me the most. And I see so few queer people that are in position like calling this out, or like even critiquing it, or like it's just got to a point where I'm like, yo, how is this okay? Like, how are we even saying that this is like, folks are dealing with oppression and all of that, when it's like, yo, again, I've led a lot of protests for you know, the Black community and the Black youth and things like that, and like it'd be hard pressed to get support from Walmart. Like it'd be a cold day in hell before we get in support from like Bank of America. You know what I mean? But like at a queer or gay thing, or it's like, what, like they're there, and before you can hang up the phone, every single like Fortune 500 company is there. And it's just like, I feel like the LGBTQ community needs to like be hyper aware and hypercritical of their part in upholding capitalism and the same things that have oppressed the most oppressed of queer folks and of gender non-conforming folks for so long. And like, wait, how much they're being complicit in folks' oppression, you know, by upholding these things. Because I go to these protests and like, I'm sorry, not protests, parades, and I feel conflicted and oppressed.
It's truly, truly sick and upsetting. It's so upsetting. It's the easiest way for corporations to maintain favor with the general public is to pinkwash, to stick a flag on whatever they can, because LGBT issues, particularly like gay issues, particularly like white cis het men issues, are why gay liberation was expedited the way it was, because so many gay men in power were respected automatically culturally because of the white supremacist system the corporations uphold. And so we were able to accept gay rights because it was marketed to us. It's always about the marketing. You know, Black liberation is not something that can be marketed and still corporations still benefit. You know, they're more obviously conflicting. There's still white supremacy in LGBT issues, you know, and so corporations can market off it. And I know the idea that we're still upholding the same beauty standards, even in queer representation, is it's so upsetting, because we have the opportunity to not, but we won't. Because even our most, you know, radical representations of queerness on TV are still so vanilla and so safe and so marketable. Myself included, like, I'm a representation of thin white beauty. Like, that's why I got the job. There are some representations like, okay, Euphoria fucking went there in many ways. And like, Hunter Schafer is fucking awesome. And I'm really grateful for her. And Zendaya. But it's still not enough. It's not enough. And it's because no one's gonna buy it.
Not supporting it. Like, I mean, I think that it's really easy. Like, I personally think, like, because I'm big on accountability and responsibility. And we live in a world where, you know, no one wants to take accountability and responsibility. No one wants to. And I feel like it starts with us. Like, it starts with us holding ourselves to a higher standard and saying, yo, I'm going to be accountable. It's being like, responsibility is, okay, I didn't make this mistake, but it's my responsibility to still fix it, you know? And it's like, a lot of folks are like, hey, I didn't do that. I didn't spill that milk. But it's like, yo, but you are here. Like, climate change, right, is one of those things of like, I just got here. I only been on Earth this long. How did little I cause climate? Wait, you think I am gonna mess with the Earth and the climate, that I can do that? Like, what, by my plastic cup? Come on, by my straw, like, right? But it's hard to do that. But then it's like, but I'm still responsible though. Like, even though I didn't do all of that, I'm still responsible for taking care of this Earth. I'm still responsible. So it's like, at a certain point, I think folks feel like because they were oppressed, or because they had a hard life, or because they were in a situation that was abusive, or they've dealt with hard stuff, that now that they don't have to have responsibility. It's like no. Like, the people who made change in our world, and when I'm talking about like the Martin Luther Kings and folks like that, like, we're young. And they were like, I didn't cause this. I didn't cause racism. I didn't cause patriarchy. I didn't cause the wars. But like, yo, it's my responsibility. If I want a better world, that I have to like be responsible. And so like, I'm like fully fine putting that responsibility, especially when folks want to like change the world and change folks' minds. Then it's like, you have to like go the full way with it and be responsible, and like, yo, okay, I'm gonna take on this responsibility and really reshape what that means and do it in a loving way. You know what I mean? Like, and the thing is not saying that like, I'm saying that it's not saying that no Walmart. It's saying, Walmart sees value in this. How can we use that to help liberate folks? Like, you know what I mean? Like, using your power for actual change. And if you don't know what that is, then get out the way. It's kind of like my thing. It's like, yo, all right, wait. If you don't know, then like move out the way, because you're just lost and leading folks into destruction, you know. Instead of being like, okay, if Amazon wants to slap a gay flag on their thing or do an ad where they're like, we want to deliver to you no matter who you choose to love, you know, whatever it is. It's like, and like how many like queer folks are like shopping at Whole Foods, which is like Amazon, all these things. It's like, okay, are you going to use your energy and power and your cultural power to like make change, or just to like be quiet and be happy that they're like accepting you, you know? And it's like, that comes from, you know, fear and being afraid of like, oh, losing your like, oh, then they just won't want to, you know, work with you or represent or whatever. And it's like, for me, I've lost a lot for standing up for folks that I, you know, it'd been easier to just be quiet about or not mention this, or, you know, I'd have probably got more deals or more endorsements, or, you know what I mean, invited to more parties or whatever if I didn't stand up and do that. But it's like, wait, for me, the whole point of getting in this position is to use it so so more folks have like opportunity. And so for me, like, I'm so comfortable like critiquing the queer community because of what you said, which I had to snap for, which is there's so much white supremacy that is embedded in the LGBTQ community. And it's like, yo, are you using that for good? Or are you just using it to uphold white supremacy and make the rich get richer? Which they also are getting more wealth has been taken from the folks, just regular people, in the last 2 years. I mean, it's just like a crazy wealth transfer that has happened, right? Like, and like, you know, again, I'll say Bezos and all these folks, again, Walmart and what's his name? Bill Gates and all these folks are like getting crazy rich. And it's because we don't want to come together and fight for what's right. And I'll say, even with gender, I feel like we all have more in common than we have apart. And like, all of this stuff is, they're constantly finding ways for like, everything is ways for like men to hate women, for women to hate men. Like, they're constantly pushing more and more for us to hate each other. And they want to add in the non-binary and trans folks to like hate the hetero folks. And like, that's all it's supposed to be. And we have to find ways for us to come together so we can all rise. You know, like, we all have more in common than we have apart. Like, all these things are such little things. So anyway, that's my
I fucking love you. I'm so inspired by you. I'm so inspired by you and so grateful for you and for the work that you do and how much you've sacrificed. I think that everyone needs to remember that even if it feels like the most important thing is being popular on social media and everybody standing you and whatever the fuck, it is not. That is an illusion. That is not real love. Adoration of each other in that sense is not real love. And it's about the risk. It really is. And I love that you represent that. I see so much risk in the way you communicate too. And I think it's just like this constant, like, allowing ourselves to be wrong is so much a part of challenging these systems. And I think that there's like a script that we've adopted that is like a resistance script, that is like what we can repost, instead of like really feeling physically in our body that we could bring a CEO to the table, that we could demand something, because we can demand something. I would like, for instance, for everyone to boycott Amazon. I think that would be a really easy thing to do. I don't know if it, I don't know. I mean, even I'm very afraid. I'm very afraid as a public figure. I've deleted my Instagram because I don't appreciate the ego feeding that it is. And I haven't found a way around it. But I know that there are other ways for us to use our power together. I mean, last summer we witnessed what it was like for our bodies to be together, you know? And I think that that's the most powerful thing. Using our money is so important too. I mean, how many of us are banking with huge banks and still talking shit about Wall Street, you know? How many of us are going to Whole Foods every week and still talking shit about Jeff Bezos? How can we live with these contradictions, and how can we consciously cut them out so that we are speaking and acting from a place of truth and love?
Yeah. It's not necessarily, it's not necessarily easy, and it's gonna take, work. And I mean, like, the reason a company like Amazon is so rich and so powerful, so big, so fast, is because they've gotten really good at giving us what we want,
Right.
and what folks want and what they need, and making it super simple. And like, this is one of the things I say in politics is like, okay, so the big bad guy is in office, or the big bad person is in power, you have to be better than them. You don't just get to be like, oh, I believe what's right, so you did. It's like, no, like, you have to like beat them at their own game. And it's hard because they're the machine, because they are well organized like a machine. They press a button and then something happens easily because they've got well organized, and everybody knows their role, and they can like shut up and just stick together for their goal, right? Of like oppression. They can do that, right? Whereas like, the opposition sometimes isn't willing to like out organize. They're not willing to like out think and out work the folks that are in power. And that's the only way that you do that, is like, it's hard work. It's like consistency. It's really like being on top of it. And yeah, it's like, to be better than Amazon, to be better than the Republican Party, you have to create something better than that. And when you tell folks that, they're like, I don't want to do all that work. It's easier just to be oppressed, and then them just like me just be a complicit in that. A lot of folks don't want to like put that work in. And so like, for me, I'm like at the point where like, I don't want to do all of that work. It's not fun. It's not going to be, easy or fun, but it's like, this is how we do it. This is how we do it, is like out organizing them and finding ways that we can come together. But the beauty of it is there's more of us than them. There really, really is. And like, I think when you actually put up a valiant effort, when you actually hold them to this standard and actually put up a fight, half the times they'll just go down. You know what I mean? Like, because like they haven't been challenged in this way. And so that's what I'm hoping to do. And like, I really hope that you and I can like continue to have these conversations, and like, maybe we can find a way to like have these conversations, because I love talking about gender. And I really love what you said about giving ourselves permission to be wrong. It only happens when we have these conversations in like a raw way, where folks are allowed to say the wrong things. And, I fought for, in my campaign for mayor and my campaign for Congress, I fought for something called love centers, which is a place where folks can kind of have these conversations. Because it's like, yo, where does a dad who just became a dad at 19 and just grew up watching mainstream media, where does he learn how to be more accepting of their queer child? Where do you learn how to love a gay child? Like, in a real way, and support them in a real way. Because I know there's folks that like want to do that, but there's not a place for that. There's plenty of places where you learn how to hate a gay child, but there's not places where you learn how to love them. Where does somebody who has learned all these toxic traits, this toxic masculinity, men and women who have toxic masculine traits and all of these things, where do they find the place to unlearn them, or learn that that's okay? Where are these places, right? And it's like, it's upon us to create these places. We can't just want to tear down the other things and not build stuff, for the future, build a world that actually like allows these things to happen to be something new.
And and giving people an alternative is so important, because I think like so often the conversation revolves around what we can't do rather than what we can and where we can go. And I wanted to ask you too about, because I've actually never visited and I would love to, your space in Bushwick, and how you found that and how you manage that and what that space is like.
I would love to continue the conversation there, and like even have like a live talk where we could like have more folks come in and speak, talk about this. Like, this is what I wanted to do, and for me, I grew up in church. My grandparents have a church they built here in the 60s. And it's massive now. But, I grew up around a bunch of like positive role models, and like, again, it was in the guise of Christianity of that, but what wasn't lost on me was that community. And then in 2020, someone offered me a space, and they were like, yo, you throw all these events. I throw a bunch of events. They were like, you should have our space. And then they were like, over the pandemic, saying, yo, you could use this, like give out food, and you could like do something. And then I finally opened it in June while I was like throwing protests and all of this stuff. And like, it just came together really fast, which was the paperboyprints.com love gallery. And, one, I named it after myself because I'm like, there's hella statues about slave owners and colonists and like all of these people. And I'm like, nah, like this one's gonna be after me. and it's like gonna force me to hold myself to a standard of like being great. Now, I've focusing on like programming there and giving folks space that traditionally like don't have that opportunity. And just like being like a safe space, like in all of the meanings of that. And it's been crazy because we've even been like attacked, like recently, like someone like knocked the windows out of my bus and has been coming by, and they've been like harassing like folks at like some of the like the queer bars nearby, and they've been coming and specifically like looking for me. And because they know that this space is a safe space for queer folks, where it's like you're completely accepted, like nobody cares, just like a part of our ethos. And if you know, and to the point where like it will fully be like more queer folks, more trans folks than non, and which is so dope for me. And even like someone that inspired me, and one of the first person that like ever like paid me to perform in like New York, and he passed away in the party scene. But he was like so adamant about bringing together like the rappers and the street rappers with the drag queens and the queer folks, and it just like being normal. And like that was a part of his dream. And I'm so happy that like I'm able to like continue that, you know what I mean? Like create safe spaces, bring people together, like-minded folks, like, yeah, so.
Incredible. Yeah, I gotta come visit. I just got back to the city, so I'll keep a lookout on your Instagram and see when the next event is. Thank you so much for talking. This was just it was incredible to talk to you. I really enjoyed this.
Yes, we'll wait till we do it in person. And
yeah,
we have some more folks.
We gotta have a whole round table. Yeah, and then we'll dance.
I'm excited. I feel like these conversations aren't had enough. In a real raw way, where it's like okay to make mistakes. I'm like, I've kind of sacrificed myself to be like, yo, like I allow folks to sometimes misgender me or make mistakes or say, because it's like there were folks who allowed me to do that to get to the point to where I can, and I know that's not for everyone, but for like, so folks can have a safe space to ask the wrong question, and so they can get to a point where they can like be more accepting, because it's, again, like, when do you have, only way I got it was from like having friends that were,
Right.
like queer and going through these things, and we're having these conversations and we're being like, oh, come on, like, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so yeah, I appreciate you all like starting this conversation, and like, I know it was a long time coming, but
Much love, guys.
Bye. Lots of love.
bye.